Hello, welcome to Collected Stories. This is Kyra,
This is Dawn,
and we're going to be
and
reviewing our book of the month, Thistlefoot.
Thistlefoot.
All
This was
right.
my choice this month,
Yes.
simply because I love the name. I heard a few things about it in January, but nothing that told me anything about the plot. Um, the little that I did read about it, I knew it had something to do with Russian fairy tales, which reminded me of Catherine Arden, who does another series of books based on Russian fairy tale feeling kind of things. So I was like, okay, I loved her books, so I chose the sofa.
Yeah. Yeah. And I went into it completely blind based on, you wanting to do this book. So if you had, little to no, inside of the book, I had zero. I
Yeah.
just had the cover, and that was it. I knew it was a retelling of some sorts, which I love retelling stories, with a modern kind of twist or take on it. And so I just kind of had no knowledge going into it. And as tradition with our book of the month video, we're going to do a thumbs up or a thumbs down based on if we liked it or didn't like it. But it's a surprise. We haven't talked to each other about it. So
Yeah. We could even
three.
do the middle to as well if we're feeling
Okay.
little. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Three, two,
Two,
one.
one.
Yes. Yes. I really liked it. I knew you were gonna like it, but I really liked it.
I'm glad. I'm glad I picked a
Yeah.
book that you really liked.
Yes. Yeah.
um, what?
And retellings are great, but it can go either
Yeah,
way.
I was pleasantly surprised that it was set in modern day because I was thinking like Catherine Arden, hers are set in the past,
Hmm.
in a magical world, magical realism world. So I was, yeah, really happy. It also reminded me a little bit of Neil Gaiman in the way he writes. Parts of it reminded me a little bit of like his book American Gods,
Hmm.
um, with the Long Shadow Man and the
Yeah. I thought the modern
kids.
twist brought like nice pacing to the book.
Yeah,
Sometimes like retellings can have beautiful lyrical prose to it, and you really are getting the scene. And even if it is really beautiful, it can go by really slowly. I felt like the modern take on it and the modern circumstances brought really nice pacing to the book and like conflict that kept you reading to see how the story was going to end. Because from what I've heard, even the people who did know the folklore were very interested to see the ending of the story, and that's not always the case with retellings.
yeah. And I think it was especially because it wasn't strictly a retelling per se. It was
It was like
the
inspired.
descendants
Yeah.
of this fabled person and a Baba Yaga. And I had to go on Wikipedia and had this phone by my side. It's like, okay, what's Baba Yaga? And learned a
I
lot.
didn't look up anything until the very, very end.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was like, you know what? I know nothing about the folklore, and I love folklore, and so it's kind of rare that I feel like I didn't even hear about it. So I just kind of was like, I'm just going to take the story at face value and then kind of dissect it a little bit later. Because I didn't want to spoil it for myself too. I was afraid that it would be like Baba Yaga dies at the end, like it's just something,
Yeah, yeah.
um, but I really enjoyed the the house perspective.
Yes.
Like I love when seemingly like inanimate objects, well, I guess in this case it's a little different because it becomes animated, but
Yes, it has legs.
things that we look at as objects in conventional life have such character and personality in a book that they become its own character, kind of like in a Victorian novel, like a big Victorian estate, like in old England. It has a character of its own. It brings so much to the story that it has personality and kind of its own life. And I love when books do that. And this book did it so well, I felt like. you
Yes.
really thought about Thistlefoot, the house, like their feelings, their emotions, their experiences, what it's gone through over the years. And I love when books are able to do that, because then you're like, how do I look at my own home, my own furniture, and my own life?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. I really love the house bits. It also reminded me very much of the Shakespearean chorus. Um, he has that in a variety of his plays where all of a sudden it's the chorus, it's either like the witches in Macbeth,
Oh
um,
yes.
and
Yeah.
they comment on the
Yeah.
scene, or they add an element that sheds light on what's happening.
Mhm.
And it was, especially in the beginning. And I also, well, I'll talk about that later, that part, when I thought about it. um I also loved the language.
Yeah.
I just liked writing like that. That's not for everybody. Some people find it overly
I
done.
really enjoyed it. Yeah.
I loved the mixing of metaphors.
Isaac.
Yes, thank you. I was like fresh, because that's what he's nicknamed by somebody
Yeah.
in the book. And Isaac says, your enemy's enemy is worth two in the bush. And it was just like,
Yeah.
but it almost makes sense in this situation that it happens. It's just,
Yes.
and he does that a few times throughout the book. I really like
Yeah.
that. And I thought it was definitely a great fall read.
Yes.
um it's set in the fall, it's dark, but not overly dark. It's not like horror, typical horror per se. um it's a little spooky. There's that feeling of waiting and trying to, wonder what's coming our
Mhm.
way, kind of feeling. And that reminded me of Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is another good book for this time of year. So I really enjoyed this. I also felt the whole book itself, the story itself, was almost character
Character.
in and
Exactly.
of
I was gonna
itself.
say, disclaimer to our viewers. I read this book and I finished it 10 minutes before sitting down and doing this video. So my thoughts are fresh, even though my memory of whatever person's name is not, that will not change with time. But
Yeah. And I finished it this afternoon.
mhm.
Um, but it just it the I think that's because of the way it was written. I had to read all of it. There was no skimming involved for me.
Yeah, and you couldn't, because even if you wanted to, there were so many passages that were I wanted to highlight and write down,
Yeah.
that I thought were beautiful, and I actually wanted to read one. Well, first of all, I wanted to highlight the entire prologue. I thought this prologue of the book should be an example of what a prologue should do for a book. It opened up with what is the plant Thistlefoot, and laid so many metaphors and so many interpretations and openings for meanings throughout the rest of the book, just by reading the prologue. So I thought that was beautiful. But one quote that really stuck out to me from the book, and it's short, so that's why I wanted to read it, but what happens when the walls we raise outlive the dangers they were built to keep out? At one point, does a fort become a cage? I
Yeah.
thought that was so beautiful. I thought this book also not just commented a lot on stories and the power of stories, but also trauma and collective trauma and the way it stores in our bodies and our memories and our genetics. I took actually a whole class on that, but we won't get into it. And I thought that was such a beautiful quote for, at what point do we move past these coping skills, these coping mechanisms that no longer serve us, right? Like, at what point does Isaac have to stop running? Because running is no longer, that giving him that outlet of safe adventure, finding himself. It's no longer finding himself, but running from himself.
Yeah.
And him finding that journey of okay, I can rest now because I've completed what I wanted to do. But I thought that was a really beautiful quote that sums up a lot of trauma
Yeah.
responses.
This is definitely a book I'm keeping and will
Mhm.
probably be reading several more times because I think there's more in there than I caught this time through.
Yeah, this is a book you can definitely read a few times and pull something different from it each time,
Yeah.
which anytime I have a book that's like that I read, you know, you gotta hold on to it.
Yeah, definitely. So, do we want to talk about next month?
Yes.
So, you chose The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride.
Mhm.
So, this should be fun. I don't think I've read any of James McBride.
I don't think so, me either. And I honestly barely know what it's about, but I read like the first sentence of the synopsis. It seemed very interesting.
Oh.
Seems it's new, I believe. No?
Yes, I believe
Um,
so.
yeah.
At least a frontless book, a 2023 book.
Yes. The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store is going to be a fiction story about a 1970s small town where there's a developing project going on, like a construction project. And because of that, secrets start coming out and skeletons start coming out of people's closets. And it gets pretty interesting. And that's all I'm going to say. But I do very much enjoy like a small town secrets coming out of the woodwork kind of trope in books. So I'm very excited to see how that plays out, and we're going to be reading that for the month of September. So check back in at the end of the month for our thoughts, and we'll give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. But either way, we're going to give our thoughts and tell you how we enjoyed the reading, and you can come and follow us along for our collected stories. Bye.